On this Thursday night, after their customers were grounded, airline execs get grilled.
Let me begin by apologizing.
The demands for accountability and tougher policies to protect air passengers. Rude awakening.
Oh my God.
An explosion rocks St. Catharines, Ontario, the danger to residents and firefighters. A registered charity in BC caught up in a national security investigation, the suspicions about its ties to China's government. And Russia's risky rescue mission to the International Space Station.
Their lifeboat has a serious enough problem.
Global National with Donna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. Some Canadian airline executives are apologizing for the massive disruptions thousands of travelers endured over the holidays. Executives from Air Canada, WestJet and Sunwing were summoned by the Federal Transport Committee to explain how they handled the whole mess. They admitted they failed to deliver the level of service Canadians expect, but largely blamed the weather. Transport Minister Omar Alghabra says that doesn't explain why stranded passengers were given so little information.
What is unacceptable to them and to me is when they're kept in the dark about what alternative plans are they provided or left stranded for days on end without any information. That was unacceptable.
Travelers are demanding answers and compensation. Sunwing alone says it's received about 7,000 complaints. Mackenzie Gray has our top story tonight.
After a disastrous travel season, airline executives are repenting for leaving Canadians stressed, stranded, and stuck.
Let me begin by apologizing that we failed to deliver to the level that we had expected.
And I apologize for the disruption you suffered during your trip on us. You're absolutely right. It's when we do things right, communication is the key thing.
Every single WestJetter feels the weight and anguish of not being able to meet your travel expectations.
WestJet, Air Canada, and Sunwing all blaming a combination of weather, staffing shortages, and airport issues for not getting thousands of Canadians home for the holidays.
Unlike traditional airlines, we don't have the flexibility on our network to adjust our schedule and shift passenger itineraries.
That lack of flexibility led Sunwing to cancel 67 flights over Christmas.
So, a little bit of relief.
Including Sean and Dana Lapworth's trip to Punta Cana.
Of course, disappointment because we'd hoped to get away from the cold and snow for a week, but didn't happen.
Sunwing didn't give the Lapworths a reason for the cancellation and have yet to refund the $6,000 they're owed, but they did promise an extra $125, the minimum amount they're required to pay for a canceled flight under the air passenger protection regulations.
We now have a backlog of 33,000 complaints.
The opposition believe the Lapworths are the lucky ones, saying the airline was able to skirt paying penalties to passengers, and they blame the transport minister for lax rules.
Unfortunately, the air passenger protection regime that you've created has massive loopholes in it. You could fly a 747 through these things.
We are looking at, as I said, almost every aspect of the regulation to how we can further enhance it and strengthen it.
The airline's uninterested in strengthening those regulations.
We do not believe the priority right now should be additional penalties on the only group that has any accountability and regulations that govern it.
As for the Lapworths, they made the best of their holiday, trading in the beaches of the Dominican for a hotel stay in snowy Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan. But that didn't stop them from bringing their bathing suits.
And we weren't getting on that plane. It's like, okay, well, we got to go somewhere. We've done a lot of swimming and kind of relaxing down at the pool.
The holiday travel nightmares weren't limited to the air, with some trains between Ottawa and Toronto stuck on the tracks for nearly 20 hours. The Transportation Committee is expecting to hear soon from the head of VRL, Donna, on how they allowed that to happen.
Okay, Mackenzie Gray in Ottawa, thank you. It turns out a damaged database file is to blame for that huge outage yesterday in the United States that caused thousands of flight delays and cancellations. The Federal Aviation Administration says the glitch led to the failure of the flight safety system, which alerts pilots to potential hazards. Investigators say they are still trying to pinpoint the cause, but repeated again, there's no sign of a cyber attack. Air traffic operations have resumed, but delays and cancellations are spilling over into today. There has been a large explosion at a fuel distribution facility in Quebec, and at least one person is missing. Flames and black smoke billowed above the facility in Saint-Roch-de-l'Achagan, north of Montreal. As a precaution, a 1-kilometer evacuation zone was set up around the site. That's now been lifted. Police warn, though, more explosions are possible because of the propane tanks at the fuel depot. An investigation is underway, and search crews are trying to determine if anyone else is missing.
everything we're doing right now is phone calls and trying to locate some workers, employees of the place, just to make sure where they're working today.
And in Ontario, a series of loud explosions startled people in St. Catharines early this morning. It happened at a hazardous waste facility. One man is critically injured and a huge blaze lit up the sky. As Mike Drolet reports, concerns about air quality mean some people will be unable to return home tonight.
The giant fireball lit up the morning sky, and the accompanying blast was felt over 2 kilometers away.
Oh my God.
And for the next hour, aerosol cans continued to explode like fireworks. Craig Cozen-Young lives 200 meters away and says his bedroom lit up in a glow of orange.
We were all standing outside and embers were all coming down in ash, like I said, and you could hear it crackling.
It's not yet known what started the fire at Sonic's Products, a chemical disposal facility. One employee in the building was severely injured. As firefighters arrived on scene, the roof collapsed, forcing them to surround the building and drown the fire with water. And while parts of the structure continued to burn throughout the day, it was contained.
Even as they continued to fight the blaze, fire crews realized they had 2 problems they had to deal with. Number 1, they didn't know what chemicals were inside the building. And 2, a breeze began pushing potentially hazardous smoke over a nearby subdivision. The decision was then made to evacuate that area.
Later in the day, evacuees waiting at an aquatic center were told in no uncertain terms, stay away.
Without mincing words, give your heads a shake. You're not making things better, you're not making things easier, or you're not being helpful. You're making things actively worse. Please stay out of the area.
Even with the fire contained, officials were in no hurry to open up the area because of the ongoing danger of hazardous chemicals exploding.
It's not just one substance, there's a whole bunch. So trying to say, it's one chemical, we can't do that.
Hazardous materials teams were on site early, ensuring any runoff didn't flow into Lake Ontario. Even so, residents expressed concern about lingering impacts from the incident.
This is our fear. What's down the road? If things need decontaminated, we don't know.
They're hoping for some clarity before they return home. Mike Drolet, Global News, St. Catharines, Ontario.
In Saskatchewan, the Star Blanket Cree Nation has completed a year-long ground-penetrating radar search at a former residential school. They discovered what they call 2,000 anomalies. That does not mean 2,000 potential graves. They could be rocks or tree roots, though the First Nation does say one child's jawbone was found. As Melissa Ridgen reports, much more in-depth work needs to be done.
This information is going to hit home. I'm not going to lie.
That's the message Star Blanket's search team had for community members who gathered at the former residential school gym for a debrief after phase 1 of the search for residential school graves. Ground-penetrating radar found 2,000 anomalies in the area surrounding the school, each one needing further investigation to separate what is debris left by a glacier thousands of years ago and which should be investigated as possible human remains.
We'll send a core drill down, collect a sample, bring it up, and test that sample for DNA on an area of interest.
It will be a painstakingly long process that can't start until spring. Funding for phase 2 of the search will likely have to come from Ottawa. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau seems supportive.
This work is only just beginning. But of course, the federal government will be there to support you every step of the way.
Star Blanket, 80 kilometers northeast of Regina, is just one community in the early stages of looking for children who didn't come home from residential school. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission told Canadians back in 2015 there are undocumented and unmarked graves at many of the country's 139 residential school sites. But for many Canadians, that truth didn't sink in until May 2021, when Kamloops Secwepemc announced what they believed to be 215 graves outside the Kamloops residential school. In the time since, the list of communities that are searching continues to grow as they try to find and identify buried children and either leave them where they rest or finally bring them home. Melissa Ridgen, Global News, Winnipeg.
Human Rights Watch has again given Canada's treatment of Indigenous people a failing grade. Each year, the organization looks at how human rights around the world are being violated and what can be done to strengthen those rights. As Heather Urix-West reports, this year's report highlights how the protection of Indigenous women and girls in this country is falling short.
A new year may bring new hope, but for many Indigenous communities, so many injustices of the past remain.
Here we are still trying to deal with all of the enormity of this issue in a beautiful country like Canada that has such high standards for human rights, but doesn't have those high standards for human rights for Indigenous people. 8 years since the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls to action, Human Rights Watch says Canada is still falling short. Its annual report found widespread violations of the rights of Indigenous peoples, immigration detainees, people with disabilities, and older people, pointing out that 28 First Nation communities across Canada remain subject to long-term water advisories, and that 81% of Indigenous women who had been in the child welfare system had been physically or sexually assaulted in their lifetime.
There's nothing, unfortunately, too surprising in there, particularly around when you're looking at the levels of sexual violence that they're speaking to.
Last spring, Canada's Indigenous Services Minister said she hoped Canada will be able to lift all remaining drinking water advisories by 2025. The government also released a national action plan to address murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls last year. But the progress is slow, and it's not saving lives.
Not yet, right? Because the numbers are still, the cases are still happening.
Advocates are pushing governments to do more, but the solutions are not political alone, with anti-Indigenous racism present across so many aspects of Canadian society.
And until we deal with systemic racism and we put forward policies to change systemic racism, it's going to perpetuate until the genocide is complete.
Education and awareness might be the most important part of this puzzle, because even in a country like Canada, human rights abuses are more likely to continue when kept in the dark. Heather Urix-West, Global News, Calgary.
A special counsel has been appointed to investigate U.S. President Joe Biden's handling of classified documents found on his property and in an office. The White House has confirmed a second batch of classified documents was found after a search of the library and garage of the president's Delaware home. They date back to when he was vice president, as do a batch of files found in an office he used during the Obama administration. Biden says he is fully cooperating with the investigation. A registered charity in Canada under scrutiny. Coming up, its alleged ties to the Chinese government. A BC group with charitable status in Canada is part of an RCMP investigation into activities allegedly targeting members of the Chinese-Canadian community. RCMP national security officers were seen at the headquarters of the Wenzhou Friendship Society last month as part of an investigation into allegations associated with the Chinese government's foreign interference tactics. As Neetu Garcha reports, police in Canada are just starting to untangle what's alleged to be a state security apparatus operating out of a handful of centres.
This building in a busy Richmond, BC neighborhood houses the operations of the Wenzhou Friendship Society, which says it supports new immigrants and helps them give back to Canada. What goes on inside the gated property is part of a Canadian national security investigation and the subject of a Global News investigation on the RCMP's probe into allegations China has been operating covert centres in Canada using threats, intimidation, and corruption to suppress local opposition and influence policy. The Society's website, tax returns, and social media pages indicate it sends delegates to gatherings with Chinese Communist Party officials while taking part in local fundraising initiatives. The site also includes a message praising Chinese President Xi Jinping's strong leadership. It has also been registered federally as a charity since 2002, receiving federal tax benefits.
Express our concern.
Victor Ho is a former journalist with Singtao Daily, Canada's largest Chinese-Canadian newspaper.
It is doing something for the foreign government. Obviously, this is for Chinese government. How come this happened? And then we have no laws and no government officials to take note on it or even prohibit or forbid it.
The society isn't facing any criminal charges. A director with the society has denied any wrongdoing. But interview requests have gone unanswered, as have knocks on the door at the Wenzhou Friendship Society. And the Society's website says it has attended meetings and events with members of the United Front Work Department and the Overseas Chinese Affairs Office, two groups the Canadian government alleges are key parts of the Chinese Communist Party's strategy to pressure and manipulate its diaspora. Members of the RCMP were seen here at the Society's location last month. Its integrated national security enforcement team said Chinese Canadians are victims of the activity they're investigating.
This is very ridiculous to me. The organization or the society receive Canadian taxpayers' money.
There have been similar police probes in the Toronto area where the Spanish nonprofit group Safeguard Defenders identified two so-called overseas police service stations, which appear to support China's alleged efforts to repatriate dissidents living abroad. The Wenzhou Friendship Society is part of a 130-member alliance of Chinese associations in Canada formed in 2008, and the probe into its operations could just be the start of Canada's unraveling of alleged covert Chinese efforts to advance its strategic interests. Neetu Garcha, Global News, Richmond, BC.
Animal activists ahead pressuring the federal government to keep a promise and end the export of live horses to Japan. Japan's Prime Minister is in Ottawa today, meeting Justin Trudeau. The economy and trade was front and center, along with security issues, particularly those in Eastern Asia. Our chief political correspondent, David Aiken, was keeping an eye on the meeting. David.
Well, Donna, Prime Minister Fumio Kishida is touring G7 capitals ahead of hosting the G7 summit in Japan in May. And threats in his part of the world have been a constant theme on that tour. Every G7 member except Japan, of course, is part of the North Atlantic and European community, where Russia's war on Ukraine has been the most pressing security threat. Kishida's task is to remind his G7 colleagues, including Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, that an increasingly belligerent China and North Korea pose serious threats in East Asia. It is very important, Kishida told reporters, to have a strong defense capability in such a severe security environment.
Which is why Canada welcomes so strongly the new national security strategy that Prime Minister Kishida just put forward.
Japan just doubled its defense budget and is now acquiring missiles and other weapons with offensive capability, the first changes in Japan's defense posture since the end of the Second World War.
Today's Ukraine could be tomorrow's East Asia. And so there's a real concern that China could use unilateral aggression to change the status quo. And that's what this is about. It is purely defensive.
Though security issues will be top of mind for the G7, trade was also an important topic during Kishida's visit to Canada's capital.
Obviously, we talked a lot about how Canada can be a reliable supplier, not just of energy, but of critical minerals, of commodities and resources, including agricultural resources.
Trudeau wants to build on that. He announced today he is going to dispatch a trade mission to Japan in October. Donna.
And David, Canada continues to export live horses to Japan, where they are killed and eaten. The Trudeau government had promised to end the export of live horses for slaughter. So what's happening?
It did, Donna. During the 2021 election campaign, the Liberals promised to end the export of live horses to Japan. Activists, some of whom were on Parliament Hill today and took these pictures, say the long journey by air to Japan is stressful and inhumane for the animals. Now, the Liberals say they are still working on keeping that promise. The issue did not come up during Prime Minister Kishida's visit today. Now, the Canadian government says about 50,000 live horses have been exported to Japan in the last 8 years. And of those, authorities are aware of the deaths of just 5 animals while in transit. The Canadian Food Inspection Agency says it ensures horses are fit for travel and are transported humanely. Donna.
All right, David Aiken in Ottawa, thank you. Stranded in space next, Russia's rescue mission to the International Space Station. Russia's space agency is gearing up for an out-of-this-world mission. It intends to rescue 2 cosmonauts and an astronaut from the International Space Station. The Soyuz capsule they were supposed to come home in is damaged, so as Jackson Prosco explains, they need someone to come and get them.
Noticing a stream of particles coming out of the Soyuz.
Like a car with a blown radiator, the Soyuz spacecraft has no way to cool down.
Particles of what could be coolant fluid.
The ship lost all of its coolant in December after a direct hit from a microscopic micrometeoroid while docked at the International Space Station. Russia's space agency now says the capsule is unsafe, which is bad news for the 2 Russians and 1 American who were expecting to ride the Soyuz back to Earth after months in orbit.
Basically, their lifeboat has a serious enough problem that they can't trust it to bring them home.
Former Canadian astronaut Chris Hadfield flew aboard a Soyuz capsule for his mission commanding the ISS.
If your ship has no way to provide cooling, you can rapidly get to the point where human beings can no longer function.
Space is a dangerous place, and this situation is now extra risky because there are actually 7 people on board the space station from 2 different crews. Suddenly, there's no option for everyone to escape in an emergency. The station's only other lifeboat seats just 4. In February, Russia plans to launch an empty Soyuz to bring the men back, which will delay the launch of the next ISS replacement crew by months. 3 will come home, the other 4 will get some unexpected extra time to enjoy the view, and all things considered, they're likely not complaining.
Oh, it's like a gift. All it does is give those 3 people a greater chance to do what they've trained their whole lives for.
Jackson Prosco, Global News, Washington.
And that is Global National for this Thursday. I'm Donna Friesen. Tonight's Air Canada is a little far out. NASA's James Webb Telescope has confirmed the existence of an exoplanet. That's a planet that orbits another star. It's about 41 light years away, and it's almost the same size as Earth. Thanks for watching. Farah Nasser will be at the anchor desk tomorrow, and I will see you Saturday for the new reality. Bye-bye.